I grew up in a town that sits on the edge of the Appalachian foothills. Hiking the ridgelines was a routine escape after long work weeks, and I knew the switchbacks and side trails better than the streets around my apartment. One Saturday in late spring, parked at the familiar gravel lot just before dusk. The air smelled of wet bark and thawing soil, a damp sweetness that clung to the throat. The first stretch of trail was comfortingly ordinary. My boots pressed the soft earth, sending up faint notes of cedar and rot. A whip poor called in rhythmic bursts, and the river below hissed like static. Yet there was something slightly off, a notice board missing the usual maps, its empty frame swinging in the breeze. Half a mile in, the forest thickened. I felt a faint vibration through the ground, as though distant machinery was running deep underground. I paused, but it faded when I stood still. I told myself it was nothing, perhaps the echo of a freight train on the valley tracks. By the time I reached the ridge overlook, twilight had soaked the treetops in dull violet. I stood there, breathing the sharp scent of pine resin, and promised myself I would turn back before the dark set in. That was when the forest fell silent. Not gradually, but in a single, sudden absence. The whip poor will cut off mid-call. No rustle of leaves, no sigh of wind. Just the sound of my own breath, and a new, metallic tang in the air, like blood warmed by iron. I told myself it was nothing. I was wrong. I started back the way I'd come, but the trail had narrowed into a corridor of undergrowth that I didn't remember. Branches reached across like hooked fingers, snagging my jacket and leaving resinous streaks on the fabric. The deeper I walked, the more the landmarks betrayed me. The moss-covered boulder I had passed earlier now leaned at a different angle. The fallen birch lay on the wrong side of the path. When I pulled out my compass, the needle twitched aimlessly, as if the magnetic north had been erased. A low cracking echoed behind me. I turned sharply, flashlight beam slicing the darkness. Nothing but trees, straight, endless, indifferent. The smell of iron thickened, coating the back of my throat. My phone screen glowed for an instant before the bars dropped to nothing. A bead of cold sweat slid down my spine despite the mild night air. Every step forward felt like sinking. The soil gave slightly, soft and spongy, and the silence pressed closer until I could hear the blood beating behind my ears. A branch snapped again, closer this time. I froze, my breath held tight in my chest. The sound stopped to dot. It felt as though the forest was waiting for me to move. I started back the way I'd come, but the trail had narrowed into a corridor of undergrowth that I didn't remember. Branches reached across like hooked fingers, snagging my jacket and leaving resinous streaks on the fabric. The deeper I walked, the more the landmarks betrayed me. The moss-covered boulder I had passed earlier now leaned at a different angle. The fallen birch lay on the wrong side of the path. When I pulled out my compass, the needle twitched aimlessly, as if the magnetic north had been erased. A low cracking echoed behind me. I turned sharply, flashlight beam slicing the darkness. Nothing but trees, straight, endless, indifferent. The smell of iron thickened, coating the back of my throat. My phone screen glowed for an instant before the bars dropped to nothing. A bead of cold sweat slid down my spine despite the mild night air. Every step forward felt like sinking. The soil gave slightly, soft and spongy, and the silence pressed closer until I could hear the blood beating behind my ears. A branch snapped again, closer this time. I froze, my breath held tight in my chest. The sound stopped to dot. It felt as though the forest was waiting for me to move. The trees parted to reveal a clearing bathed in a weak gray glow. Objects lay scattered as though arranged. A rusted lantern streaked with soot. A child's canvas shoe stiff with age. A cracked watch whose second hand ticked steadily despite its missing battery. The center yawned a black hole in the earth, perfectly round, breathing a cold current that smelled of minerals and old water. The surrounding air trembled faintly, like the aftermath of distant thunder. I stepped closer. My flashlight dimmed to a sickly yellow. The woods behind me sealed shut, branches knitting like a living wall. Then everything stopped. No wind, no insects, not even the beat of my own heart in my ears. A voice, low and certain, came from the darkness below. It said my name once, perfectly clear. The ground pulsed beneath my feet. I stumbled back, nearly falling, and turned toward what I thought was the direction of the trail. There was no trail, only endless trees that seemed to rearrange themselves with each breath. I ran until my legs gave out, guided by nothing but blind terror. When I finally burst into the gravel lot, dawn was bleeding into the sky. My car sat alone, frost beating the windshield. No hours had passed on my watch. I have never hiked those woods again. Yet on certain nights, when the wind carries a scent of cold iron, I feel the forest breathing with me, waiting for me to return. The rain came down in heavy sheets when I pulled off the 2-lane highway. The station's fluorescent canopy flickered like an old movie reel, casting thin light over the soaked pavement. The air smelled of wet pine and gasoline. I pushed the glass door open. A single chime sounded, then faded. No clerk appeared. Shelves of snacks stood like abandoned aisles in a forgotten store. The register drawer hung open, coins scattered across the counter. A small radio behind it whispered a country song that dissolved into static. "Hello?" My voice echoed sharper than I intended. No answer, only the steady hum of the lights and the smell of stale coffee. I filled the tank, paid cash by leaving bills on the counter, and hurried back into the storm, telling myself the attendant had stepped outside. But the unease clung to me like the damp air. The climb toward Laurel Gap is steep even in daylight. Tonight the road was a slick black ribbon with no shoulder. I gripped the wheel as the curves tightened, rain pounding the windshield in relentless rhythm. Far behind, 2 points of light appeared, headlights floating through the mist. They kept perfect pace, never gaining, never lagging. I turned onto the narrower stretch toward the ridge. The lights behind me winked out as if a switch had been thrown, but the weight of being watched pressed harder. Around the next bend, my high beams caught a shape. A man stood ankle-deep in runoff at the road's edge, coat plastered to his frame. His head was tilted slightly, as though he'd been waiting. I pressed the accelerator, tires hissing on wet asphalt. Another curve, another flash of high beams, and there he was again. Same drenched coat, same shadowed face. No hitchhiker could move that fast. Not on this road, not in this storm. A sour smell, like damp soil and rusted metal, seeped through the vents. My chest tightened. I whispered to steady myself. A string of half-remembered lyrics, but the words felt swallowed before they left my lips. The next bend, he stood closer to the center line. I swerved, heart hammering. For a fraction of a second his head turned sharply, following me with impossible precision. The storm cut off like a faucet as I crested the ridge. No wind, no rain, just the faint ping of cooling metal. Then came the sound. Slow, deliberate steps crunching wet gravel. They circled the car once, then again, weird and patient. I didn't dare look. My breath fogged the windshield as I gripped the wheel. The footsteps stopped. The silence thickened until I thought I'd gone deaf. I turned the key and the engine roared to life. I drove without looking back, the road unspooling beneath me like a tunnel with no end. Even now, years later, when rain drums the roof, I sometimes wake to those same slow steps outside my door. The gravel road to Black Elk Hollow was slick with rain, headlights catching sheets of mist that clung to the trees. I'd been called to check a malfunction at the repeater station, a job I'd done a dozen times without incident. The building squatted against the hillside, cinderblock walls streaked with moss, steel tower lost in low clouds. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed over humming racks of equipment. I powered up the monitor, logging the faint hiss of static. Then, beneath it, a low syllable threaded through. My name, clear enough that I flinched and looked behind me. Only the empty doorway stared back. The fog thickened until the tower disappeared entirely, leaving only the faint red beacon blinking in a white void. I stepped outside, boots sinking into wet gravel. The air smelled of wet stone, and something sharper, like rust. A faint crunch of footsteps came from the road. I called out, voice thin in the mist. No answer. The sound stopped, then resumed behind me. I spun, heart hammering. Nothing. Only the hiss of fog and the slow pulse of the beacon above, glowing like a distant eye. The generator hum faltered for a breath, as if the entire hollow held its breath with it. The monitor erupted in patterned bursts, short, long, short like a coded message. My name surfaced in the rhythm, each syllable dragging across the speakers like a fingernail. I grabbed my phone to record. The screen went black, warm in my hand, as though it had been left on a heater. The fluorescent light dimmed. Shadows slid across the walls, though nothing moved to cast them. A faint smell of wood smoke wove through the metallic air. From the tree line came a low chant, indecipherable words carried on the fog. I felt drawn toward the sound, as if the hollow itself pulled at my ribs. The fog parted as I moved forward, revealing a ring of dark forms around the tower, silent and unmoving. The red light blinked faster, each flash a jolt through my chest. The static in my head swelled until it was all there was, a single continuous note that seemed to come from inside my skull. The ground beneath me softened, cold and slick. I felt both weightless and pinned. When I opened my eyes again, gray dawn lit the empty road. My truck sat where I'd parked, dry and untouched. A T home. The radio in my kitchen flickered on by itself, hissing a whisper that shaped my name. The road into Briar Fork narrowed until tree limbs brushed the truck's sides. Damp leaves carpeted the path, their smell rich and earthy. My grandparents' cabin emerged from shadow like an old memory. Weathered boards, tin roof streaked with rust. Inside, dust coated everything in a thin gray film. I opened windows to the cool mountain air. A faint sweetness drifted in, mixed with the metallic tang of rain. Near dusk, I stepped onto the porch and saw it, a thread of smoke curling from the valley floor, too thin for a campfire, too steady for mist. I watched until dark swallowed it whole. The road slopped downward into shadow. Brambles tugged at my jeans, leaving damp scratches. I paused at a clearing where sunlight should have reached, but the canopy let none through. Mud beneath my boots was unnaturally warm, steam rising in thin wisps. A distant metallic clink echoed, soft, steady, hypnotic. I called out, half expecting a hunter. My voice was swallowed by the woods. The smell of iron thickened. My phone screen flickered and went black. The forest seemed to lean closer, branches arching overhead like ribs. The sound of the swaying metal grew louder, then stopped. Complete silence pressed in. The glow floated just ahead, swaying like a pendulum. Each time I quickened my steps, it matched the distance. Frost formed on the undergrowth, though the night was mild. My breath rasped in the cold air. Figures stood among the trees, tall, narrow silhouettes that did not move. Their presence pressed against my mind more than my sight. The metallic clink merged with my heartbeat. I whispered my grandparents' names, a plea or a question. The lantern paused, tilting slightly, then continued deeper into the hollow. I followed, unable to stop, drawn by a need that wasn't entirely mine. The clearing opened suddenly, moonlight pooling like water. At the center lay a perfectly round depression, soil black and damp. The lantern hovered above it, burning without flame. A single word, my name, carried on the still air in my grandmother's voice. I stepped forward despite myself. The glow dimmed, then vanished. Darkness pressed so complete I could hear my heartbeat echo. I turned to run, but the trail bent in directions I didn't know. Branches clawed the forest, reshaping with each frantic step. When I burst onto the cabin porch, the sky was pale with morning. Behind me, the woods exhaled a single metallic clink. The first time I heard the whistling, I thought it was just the wind carving through the Appalachian ridgelines. Black Elk Hollow sits far off the paved roads of eastern Kentucky, a pocket of forest where the canopy knits together so tightly that even noon feels like twilight. I'd driven there late in October to meet my cousin Ray, who works seasonal logging contracts. He'd insisted I come see the old family land before the company crews moved into clear sections of it. Our grandparents once owned these woods, but decades of taxes and backroom deals had stripped most of it away. All that remained was a rough cabin and a few forgotten acres at the edge of the hollow. The drive took 3 hours beyond the last cell signal. By the time I turned onto the rutted track that served as a driveway, fog had gathered like low smoke. Trees leaned inward, their bare branches clattering faintly, a sound like dry bones. I killed the engine and stepped out, the silence pressing in like a living thing. Ray's pickup was there, but the cabin was dark. The air smelled of damp pine and iron, a scent I couldn't place. I called his name, No answer, just a thin whistle that seemed to drift from somewhere beyond the tree line. 3 short notes, rising then falling, almost playful. I told myself it was the wind, yet the sound repeated, exactly the same pitch and timing, as though someone were practicing a tune. My pulse ticked faster. I grabbed my flashlight and went inside. The cabin felt abandoned, cold hearth, blankets folded, no sign of a recent meal. On the rough-hewn table lay a single object, Ray's old hunting knife, its blade blackened with sap. A sheet of paper beneath it held only a scrawled line of pencil. "Don't follow the whistler." I stayed awake long past midnight, listening. Sometimes the tune came from the left side of the cabin, sometimes the right. Never closer, never farther. Sleep finally took me in fitful snatches. When dawn seeped through the grimy windows, Ray was still gone. Morning brought a weak gray light and a mist that clung to the ground like breath. I set out to search, following the old logging trail behind the cabin. Ray knew these woods better than anyone. If he'd gone to check the property lines or chase off trespassers, he'd have taken this path. The forest smelled of wet cedar and something coppery, metallic and faintly sweet. My boots sank into mud that still bore fresh prints, a man's size, tread matching Ray's work boots. Relief flickered. At least I was on his trail, but alongside those tracks lay another set. Bare feet, long, narrow, with toes that ended in sharp impressions, like claws or stones pressing from below. The prints weaved in and out of Ray's path, sometimes overlapping perfectly, as though whoever or whatever made them had been walking with him. Step for step, the whistle started again. 3 notes, lilting, almost cheerful. It came from up the trail this time. I gripped the knife I'd taken from the cabin and moved forward, each footfall loud in the heavy quiet. Half a mile in, I found Ray's jacket snagged on a thorn bush. The sleeve was ripped, but no blood marked the fabric. Beyond it, the trail opened into a narrow clearing where fog churned like slow water. In the center stood a circle of stones I didn't remember from childhood visits. Each rock was carved with the same crude spiral, freshly cut. The whistling stopped the moment I stepped into the clearing. The silence that followed was heavier than sound. I felt watched, no, surrounded. A sudden gust parted the fog, and for a heartbeat I saw something at the far edge. A tall, thin silhouette, head tilted unnaturally, like a crow regarding prey. Then the mist swallowed it whole. I backed out of the clearing, knife raised, but the forest seemed to fold behind me. Trees I didn't recognize crowded the trail, branches slick with moisture. The whistle returned, now to my left, closer than before. Dusk arrived faster than it should have, shadows rising from the ground instead of falling from the sky. I stumbled onto an old fire road I barely remembered, the kind the logging company once used for hauling timber. Ray's boot prints reappeared, fresher now, as if he just passed. The whistle came again, louder, 3 notes, then a pause, then 3 more, each sequence perfectly identical. My flashlight beam jittered across trees scarred with deep gouges. Sap oozed dark and sticky, smelling like rust. I followed the sound to a ravine where a stream cut through black rock. Across the water, standing ankle deep in the current, was a figure. It was man-shaped but too tall, shoulders narrow and arms too long. Its skin, if that's what it was, reflected the flashlight in a dull gray sheen like river stone. No face, just the suggestion of features that shifted when I tried to focus. Its chest swelled slightly and the whistle poured out not from lips, but from somewhere deeper, as if the forest itself breathed through it. I froze. The thing tilted its head the way I'd seen earlier, a slow, bird-like cant. In its left hand it held something small, Ray's ball cap. My voice cracked the silence. "Where's my cousin?" The whistle answered, now descending in pitch until the trees themselves seemed to vibrate. Branches around me shivered though no wind blew. Then the figure raised its right arm and pointed upstream. I ran without thinking. The trail narrowed, rocks slick beneath my boots. Behind me the 3-note whistle repeated, softer, almost coaxing. Night swallowed the woods. My flashlight dimmed, though the batteries were fresh. Upstream, the creek led to a small waterfall I remembered from childhood. Beneath it, wedged between boulders, lay Ray's backpack open, contents scattered. His phone was inside, Screen cracked. Still warm as if recently used. I shouted his name until my throat burned. The only reply was that endless three-note whistle, now echoing from every direction. Something moved above the falls. For an instant I saw Ray standing there, hand raised. Relief surged until I noticed the angle of his head, the unnatural curve of his spine. He stepped forward, and the water below did not splash. He hovered just above the surface, eyes black voids reflecting no light. "Don't follow," he mouthed, the words barely forming. Then his figure fractured into mist and was gone. The whistle deepened into a low, resonant hum that rattled my bones. The forest blurred, paths folded and unfolded like a deck of cards. Every direction looked the same. My compass spun uselessly. Hours or maybe minutes passed. Finally, I stumbled out into the cabin clearing. The door hung open, though I'd locked it. Inside, the table was bare. The knife was gone. Only a single muddy footprint remained on the wooden floor. Long, narrow, toes pressed into sharp points. Dawn came thin and colorless. Ray never returned. Search teams found no trace, no prints, no jacket, not even the stone circle I described. But some nights, when the wind slides down from the ridgeline, I still hear three notes rising, falling, whistling from the dark. And every time, I feel the urge to follow.